meeting to order. Okay, this is the call to order for the Cooperative Computer Services Budget and Finance Committee meeting via remote participation for Wednesday, February 26, 2025. Beth, can we have a roll call, please?
And I'm noting 10:02 is the start time.
Thank you.
And here comes Yolanda. Okay. Austin,
Present.
Christensen,
Present.
DiDonato,
Here.
Gardner,
Here.
Jacobson.
Right here.
Thank you, Mick. Lakshmarayan, I do not see. Sorry, Jakaki. Sorry, I missed you, Leslie.
That's right.
And Wilburn.
Wilburn is here.
Thank you, Yolanda. And we also have in attendance Joanna Bertucci, and for CCS, we have Rebecca Malinowski, Deborah Wishmeyer, and Beth Stoneburner.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. We have an agenda. Are there any additions to the agenda today? All right, hearing none. This is the part of the meeting where we have public comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to address the committee? Seeing none, we will move on to the review and approval of the minutes of our last committee meeting, which was a year ago, April 15th, 2024. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
This is Mick. I'll make that motion.
And a second?
I'll second. It's Erica.
All right. I've got Mick and Erica. Is there any discussion on the draft minutes? All right. Seeing none, let's take a roll call vote, please.
Austin,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
DiDonato,
Yes.
Gardner,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Jakaki,
Yes.
and Wilburn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great, we have minutes. All right, so we are on to the main part of our meeting today, which is the review of the draft budget, or rather the review of the current year's budget. Rebecca, do you want to get us underway here?
Sure. So since we have so many new members of the committee, I did want to take a couple minutes to go over our existing budget and kind of our budget process in general. You were all here for the approval of the budget last year in May, but that was some time ago. So I wanted to make sure we all kind of were on the same page. So this is our budget document up on my screen. And yeah, it's a budget document. You all have your own budget documents. So I will just kind of jump in. Our primary source of revenue is our library member billings. But we don't start our budget process with the member billings. We do sort of a zero-based budget process. So every year we look at what expenses are necessary to provide the services that governing board is asking for and kind of build backwards to get to our overall library billings that we'll need to bring in. We do have a budget line for OCLC billings as separate. So we do handle OCLC billing for IHLS, who handles it for the state. So there's kind of a few steps there, but we kind of separate out the library billings and OCLC billings so members can see when there are fluctuations, where those fluctuations are coming from, and also to make it easier for your own budgets, assuming you have these in separate budget lines internally. We do have another income line in our operating budget that is individual library charges, and this is for opt-in group purchase like Collection HQ, working with the National Change of Address database, buying barcode labels, anything that we might need to individually bill a library that is truly a pass-through. So there's a matching expense for both OCLC billings and individual library charges down here at the bottom of our budget, of our expenditures. Our two highest budget lines, I think not unlike your own libraries, salary is our personnel line is our highest group of expenditures, followed by our actual ILS subscription. So those are really account for 2/3 of our budget is providing the ILS to you and providing the staff to support the ILS. The other budget lines are much more operational. I'm happy to go through any questions you have about them. I'll just highlight a couple. Data communications includes the phone lines for our phone notification system. So that it's also our internet internally in the office. And then our next kind of highest spends are professional, contractual, and maintenance agreements. So this is all of the software subscriptions outside of the ILS that we need to run our office and provide services to you, as well as external support services. We're currently using OSG for managed IT support. And there's some general project help for contractors in here as well. We see someone on the phone. Can you state your name for Beth's attendance records?
Yes, this is Ishwar Lakshminarayan from Lake Forest. I'm so sorry, I'm a little late.
Oh, perfect. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And then we have our rent line here for our office. So you can see in 2022, 2023, that was much higher. That was at our previous office space. So we were able to downsize and find a new office space that meets our needs for a much more affordable rate. And electronic resources, this includes our EBSCO group purchase. So this line, this was budgeted actually before the statewide database purchase. So in future budget years, which we'll review in a couple of minutes, this will be reduced down to like $66,000 a year. So we saw some significant savings with that statewide purchase. I can go into more detail on any of these lines if you'd like me to, but I also don't want to take up too much time if you don't have questions or concerns about the operating expenditures. Hearing none, I'll pop over to development. One other note here, we do carry a balance in our operating fund. We carry a beginning balance and then an estimated final balance. And that adheres to our fiscal accountability policy and is not included in, is not planned for use, right? Like it's in the event of an emergency. Similarly, we have a development fund that is designed for perhaps capital outlays as well as special projects. So our income here is different. In the past, we have included planned transfers to the development fund in our membership billing. So before we migrated to Polaris, so back in like 2016, 2017, we were planning for that project and knowing it could cost truly $1 million. So we had been saving for a few years by billing an excess for operating and then transferring that excess to development later in the year. In recent years, we have not been doing that because we had we had a pretty hefty balance that we were actually working to return to the libraries. So we don't have any planned transfer from operating this year, although if we end up under budget, we do transfer the excess to development. If we have a planned new member investment, that will go to the development fund. So the budget was approved before Vernon's membership was approved. So we will actually have a new member investment here of just under $2,500. And then the Rails support grant, which is provided by Rails for being an LSAP and supporting the Rails mission, that comes into the development fund as well. In recent years, we've started accepting online payments for non-CCS members, and that is a function really of how the integration works in Polaris. So those funds stay with CCS rather than attempting to divvy them up and send them back to libraries based on the volume and the amount of staff time it would take to divvy and send those back.
Rebecca, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Absolutely.
The Rails support grant, do you know what the origin of those funds are?
It's from the Rails budget. So it is something they plan and budget for. So as it's from the Rails budget, it comes from state funding.
Okay, it doesn't have a federal origin.
It does not have a federal origin.
Thank you for confirming that.
Great question. So expenditures out of the development fund, the major expenditure over the past several years has been rebating the Rails support grant back to our members. You'll notice this year we reduced the amount of the Rails support grant rebate, and that is to pay for the Find More Illinois subscription without affecting our development fund balance or billing members for it. So your rebates this year have been less than in previous years, but we're also not billing you for Find More Illinois, and it has no impact to your membership fees. This year, we also changed our OCLC fee distribution metric, and several libraries saw an increase. So we used the development fund to cover half of the increase for any library who saw an increase. And then next year, we'll cover half of that amount. And then the last year, we'll cover half of that amount. And then it should be leveled out for everyone. Our development fund also is governed by our fiscal accountability policy that lists some balance guidelines, which are based on a list of potential uses for our development fund, which I'll pull up now. So this list is approved annually by this committee and then sent to governing board for review. So every year we develop a list of potential uses and give them an estimated cost, and then we total that amount. And our fiscal accountability policy calls for maintaining a balance between 75 and 150% of these total potential uses. So we have in our development fund already, this is not binding, this is just, we might want to do these things in the coming years. Next gen products from innovative or other vendors. So that would be a discovery layer, which we're in the process of reviewing and evaluating now. We also were looking at BTCAT or another OCLC alternative for a different source of records, which we have not initiated. We have Rails, Find More Illinois listed here. And then, so these are sort of a little bit more firmly planned projects. And now these are taking, well, this development resources could be taking shape in the next fiscal, which we'll talk about shortly. And OCLC smoothing in here kind of has two potential uses. One is what we're seeing now, where we're helping libraries kind of balance a cost change due to us changing our fee structure. The other thing that can happen is if a new member joins and they have been significantly overbilled by OCLC's kind of historic and out-of-date pricing structure, existing members would kind of take a hit to their fees to balance that out. So we have some fees set aside to help smooth that out if it became an issue. For the libraries that we have kind of like on deck for joining, the fees kind of balance themselves out, which is what we saw with like Mount Prospect and Waukegan. One had been overbilled, one had been underbilled, so there wasn't a big negative impact to existing members' fees upon joining CCS. And then this last bit here, potential to offset costs of new library membership. Currently, since becoming an LSAP in 2017, CCS, incoming members of CCS are eligible for a Rails grant to cover vendor costs and other costs associated, one-time costs associated with becoming a CCS member. So that grant has been super helpful for making membership financially feasible for new members because it's a big upfront cost, and Rails has essentially been covering all of the upfront cost except for an investment in the development fund for these new members. So if Rails, took a budget hit and needed to review their own spending, we have some fees set aside that governing board could determine if we wanted to use some to support an incoming member and cover some of those one-time vendor costs. Again, none of this is binding. It's just an opportunity that we see in the future that governing board could consider. So in our next meeting, we'll be updating this list again, and that will inform what we would want our development fund balance to be as we work through the new budget. So that is where we develop these ending balance guidelines on the budget. We're starting from that total development fund potential uses amount, and then setting up the range and making sure our final balance is within that range. And what initiated rebates in the previous years is that final balance was not within the range of our policy. So we wanted to send that money back to our members. Currently, we're on track this budget year. Giant spooky cat. So we are 51% of the way through our fiscal year, and our operating fund is at 47% expended. So that is great. We're actually right on track. We did budget this year with $100,000 deficit between library billings and planned operating expenses because we didn't want to increase both member fees and OCLC fees for those libraries that would see that OCLC increase. So we planned for a $100,000 deficit. We're currently at about a $75,000 or $72,000 surplus. So it could balance out really nicely at the end of the year, which is coming quickly. So we're on track this year with the budget and with planned spending. Any questions about our budget process? Okay, then that's the wrong one. The next, Anthony, if you're ready, then I'll move on to looking forward for the next budget or the next agenda item, anticipated changes.
Yes, please go for it.
All right. So in recent years, we've really been kind of like keeping on, keeping on. Folks have been satisfied with CCS services. We haven't really added anything to our plate. And that is looking to change a little bit in the coming years based on the strategic plan. We're in a little bit of an odd situation in that because of the weather situation earlier this month, we don't have as much feedback. We're not as far along in the strategic plan as I would have hoped for this meeting. So some of this is still speculation, which is why there's a lot of things in the air. So I'm interested in, I want to talk through what I anticipate the potential budget changes would be if the strategic planning shakes out kind of as we think it will. For next year, I feel like we're pretty clear on what we need to do, and it's a little bit hazier as we get into like fiscal 27 and fiscal 28. So for next year, we have 6 big projects on our agenda. We'll be completing the Vernon edition, so they'll be going live in the first half of the fiscal year. And then we'll be starting the Wakanda edition in the second half of the fiscal year. And the budget impact to those are that we have additional membership fees coming into CCS that both offset the changes in the ILS subscriptions that we'll have, as well as cover some additional overhead. So those are a positive budget impact. We'll also be working to renew our ILS contract. So for next year, our ILS contract is the same. We know what to budget for the ILS, but looking forward, things could be different. We will also likely be implementing a discovery layer, which we will know more when governing board meets in May. The May meeting for governing board is going to be wild, you guys. So we are planning to have governing board direct CCS to move forward with a discovery layer, which is currently under analysis. And we also anticipate that governing board, if not in May, then in August, would direct CCS to implement a system-wide analytics tool, which I can talk more about as well. And then we currently, as I noted, have analog phone lines in our office that provide phone notice service. And we are looking to move that to a cloud-based service pending pricing. Our server is at end of life, so we either need to buy a new server or move to a cloud-based service kind of late spring, early summer of next calendar year. So I want to talk through some of these potential budget impacts. With the contract renewal, we'll want to increase our legal fees. When we did our original contract several years ago, we spent about $7,000 in legal fees. So on the one hand, I have a little bit more experience with the contracts and may be able to answer some of my own questions that I would have had than I had back in 2017. On the other hand, prices have increased. So I'm recommending that we budget $9,000 for legal fees next fiscal, but anticipate that would return back to kind of the $3,000 area the following year. So that's a pretty small impact. In terms of implementing a discovery layer, the implementation costs will really depend on which vendor is selected. Although I would say of the vendors we're looking at, which are Innovative, BiblioCommons, and working with a service provider to implement Aspen, their subscription fees are all, when we've talked to them in the past, have all been pretty comparable. So we're working for updated quotes on those, but it's that one-time implementation cost could vary. Again, the subscription we kind of already have earmarked in the development fund. And then the analytics section is where where the impact becomes greater. So when we did our strategic planning survey that we'll be following up on at governing board, over 75% of our members said that developing a robust data analytics program within CCS was a medium or a high priority. So that has been our focus for planning for next year, even though the strategic plan is not complete. So at this point, what our plan is that we would add one staff member to CCS and implement a tool that would allow for the kinds of analysis that governing board had on their wish list in the January 24 meeting. I'm going to switch screens here to talk a little bit more about these anticipated costs. So we do have Bob. We love Bob. Bob does great work. Bob has a full workload already maintaining kind of the operational reports that our member library staff use on a day-to-day basis to complete their work. So if we are thinking that we're going to implement more strategic analytics within CCS, we need support in a different way than we've had. So if we're talking about bringing in data outside of the ILS, that is hopefully much of that will be automated, but much of it will also not be automated. And so that will require staff time to clean and organize the data and get it ready and then ingested by the tool. And then, we theoretically have this great tool that has amazing dashboards, and yes, it would be user-friendly, but we would still want to offer to our members support and assistance in interpreting and making that data actionable. So we have been, over the past couple months, looking at whether we would build something in-house, or if there is an existing tool in the world that could meet our needs. So we started with I want to say 7 vendor-provided analytics tools, like in the library and government world. Is that right?
Might have been a few more, maybe like in the 8 to 10 range.
Okay. So we started with a pretty extensive list, and CCS staff use existing webinars and literature and information from the vendors to kind of do a preliminary assessment, which we narrowed down to 3 vendors and then narrowed down to 2 vendors. And we had an initial vendor meeting with both Library IQ and Orange Boy. And it is looking like Orange Boy could be a potential option for CCS. We don't have pricing from them yet. You'll notice on my screen, I have SaaS tool subscription and a number. This number is based on existing contracts that I found for Orange Boy, and then kind of escalated the pricing based on our members' operating budgets. So this is a very rough estimate, and I'm hoping it would come in a little bit lower than this, but I don't know for sure yet. I do hope to have some initial pricing within the next couple weeks. So we have option A, which is to use a vendor provided tool, and we have option B, which is to figure out how to build it. These are kind of the costs that I have roughly assigned, not including the staff member, because I think in either situation we need a staff member. Maybe some of the skills would be a little bit different that we would need from that person, but I don't think that would be the major cost difference. So I have the 5-year cost for option A, assuming a 2.5% annual increase in the subscription fee. And then I have the 5-year costs for option B, which doesn't include an annual escalation to like hosting space. But there would likely be something, but I don't know. The hosting space estimate is based on previous analysis where we looked at moving Bob's existing web report server to the cloud. And so Bob's existing server could not handle the storage that we would need for a project of this size. It handles the ILS data and it handles it wonderfully. But if we were talking about bringing in more external data, Bob's server would not have enough storage. So this hosting space is on the higher side of what we had identified previously, but I think it's reasonable. So option A, using a vendor, theoretically is a higher 5-year cost. Over 5 years, it would potentially be $100,000 more expensive than building it ourselves. That said, I'm going to come back over here. And please jump in if you have questions about any of this. I don't have your pictures up, so if you're making confused faces, I don't see them. Oh, Yolande, yes.
So I do have a question with this. How well is this, I guess, if we build it ourselves, how well is that going to integrate with what we're doing individually at all of our different libraries, right? As opposed to us going with a vendor where it's something that might integrate well with other pieces that we already have. I guess that would be, because this is my concern, like, okay, great, we had somebody who built us out a data dashboard here, and guess what? They left, and nobody knows that code, right? So now we are screwed, and we got to start again. So I just don't want us to get into that situation, especially because there's so many different libraries here, and everybody has different, components of various other vendors that they work with. I guess that's kind of my question.
Yeah, you're speaking my language, Yolande. So yes, that is definitely a concern. Less so whether the pieces could integrate, because theoretically our developer would have access to the same APIs and other delivery methods that an existing vendor would have. But certainly the idea of, and I have here my pros and cons of a vendor tool. A benefit to the vendor tool would be proven success. They're already working with libraries. They already have these integrations built. It'd be a much faster implementation because we're not starting from scratch and making every decision from the ground up. And there is that built-in community of support. So there's not only the staff at the vendor who can provide support, but there's user groups and people who are also doing similar work and sharing their things. So there's a higher level of kind of ready documentation. So I think there's a lot of benefits to using a vendor tool. There are, I think, some challenges. The first would be the higher ongoing costs. The second, potential limits in functionality. So there's EBSCO has a tool called Panorama that actually looks really amazing, but they're not willing to build a Polaris integration because their focus is on academic libraries. So that tool is eliminated from our potential options, which is fine. There's other, vendors that we're looking at like Orange Boy, but if the vendor says, oh, we don't want to build that, we don't really have an option then. So potential limits in functionality coupled with, being subject to what the vendor is willing to develop, either, included in our subscription or for an additional cost. That said, there are a lot of challenges to building something in-house as well. So higher initial costs for sure. A much longer lead time for the tool to become useful. Like if we started developing this, if we said, all right, July 1, we're going to start working on this, I think it would be easily a year before it has anything close to what we could get from a vendor in, a couple of months. We would definitely need more in-house expertise, either to do work ourselves or more likely more time spent recruiting and managing consultants, which again leads to what Yolande brought up about like documentation. And if someone's building this, what happens when that consultant's not available and we need something else built? Do they leave us the documentation that we need to share with another developer? So it would be big and it would be unwieldy. The benefits would be lower ongoing costs, and more flexibility to meet governing board needs, assuming the human resources to meet that. Yes, Meg.
Are we aware of what libraries are already using Orange Boy?
We are, yes. I have a list, as well as the start dates of those libraries who have been using it. So that like the next part of our analysis and research, among other things, would include Orange Boy was kind of like, yeah, it'd be great for libraries that already use it. So like nothing would really change for them, but things would change for them. So we want to dig in further to that. Like if we're operating under the assumption that they'd be able to discontinue their existing subscription, that would of course be much better than them carrying 2 subscriptions for the same tool. I'm also interested in looking at those libraries that use Orange Boy and our ticket history for report requests and like kind of those higher level questions. Are they able to answer them themselves, or are they still sending similar type questions of other CCS libraries to the help desk? I don't know. Does that answer your question? Or there's 6 or 8 libraries using Orange Boy.
Yeah, that answers my question because
Okay.
if I remember right, Orange Boy for like a library of my size is like $6,000 to $8,000 a year. If I remember right, and so 8 libraries, that's $65,000 of savings if they're able to cancel that right there. So really, we're not talking about $100,000 difference over 10 over what was the timeline? I forget.
I was just
Over.
estimating a 5-year cost. Yeah, it was $100,000 over 5 years.
So if we're thinking about it as a pooled, and we were looking at Orange Boy, and now after Nina talked with you, we're like, well, we're pausing that till we get through this process, and that's going to save us $6,000 to $8,000 a year potentially. So it will provide significant savings. Considering it, I'm just saying, maybe in your calculations when we talk to the governing board, this is what it would cost for every library here to get Orange Boy. So to get it as a group would save actually like $300,000 a year or $200,000. I'm doing the math really quickly in my head, which is
Sure.
always a mistake.
Yes, no, we'll definitely look into that, as well as for part of our more robust report, as we move forward with that project. So at this point, I mean, again, we have some more questions for Orange Boy. We want to talk to our CCS members that are using Orange Boy about their satisfaction in general. But we do also have references for consortia. They tend more to be like county systems, but at least one of them is a county system that has multiple independent libraries within it. So I do think it's pretty comparable to CCS. So we'll be following up with them on their experience before we make a further decision. So again, we're kind of in like an odd timeline in that, based on, talking with directors and the survey and kind of the ongoing questions that we've had over the years, we think this is the right move. The strategic plan, though, has not yet been approved. That would, in a more documented way, justify these expenses. So, I have a couple more notes here. Moving on from analytics, unless there are other analytics questions. Again, a lot of things up in the air, a lot of moving pieces, but like these are kind of the costs we're looking at. Okay. Completing the phone notice switch. I think that ideally this will end up being kind of a wash. So our phone lines are pretty expensive, but the benefit is we have unlimited calls on them. However, if we have to buy a new server, that's a big one-time cost that we'll have to address as well. I'm working on a revised quote because right now we're in a bundle for AT&T, so who knows what utilities actually cost. So this, I think, is a much lower budget impact in general. Our current phone lines, again, are part of that $15,000 a year line in the budget, and it's not the biggest server that we'd have to replace, but it also then just requires space and upkeep and et cetera. If we could move to a cloud-based system, if it's financially feasible, that would be great. Other expected changes, we already talked about reducing the electronic resources line to account for the EBSCO statewide purchase. Rails has really been able to expand what EBSCO is offering them in their deals and discounts group package, but our pricing is the analysis I've done so far of the pricing is that definitely at an a la carte rate, our rate is better than Rails. Maybe that flagship program package is maybe a better deal. But it depends on what those other resources are. So I recommend continuing our existing EBSCO subscription for at least another year, especially because the Novelist Select component isn't available through Rails. So again, if we did eliminate this, it would just be shifting the cost back to members to go get it from Rails. The benefit would be like libraries who don't want to use Library Aware wouldn't have to pay for it. But again, overall, I think it's still better pricing through CCS as a system. Because we talked about this at governing board previously, we do have to increase our authorities maintenance budget due to the change in vendors. That's not a huge impact. And then we are continuing to evaluate Find More Illinois. So our recommendation is when we moved forward with Find More as a consortium was that we would do it for 2 years. So FY26 is that year 2. And then we'll be determining whether or not we recommend continuing it into fiscal 27. So kind of mid-year next year, we'll have that recommendation. And so that would be, again, a little bit over $100,000 from development fund if we choose to keep it or not. So some preliminary recommendations, and I can show you a spreadsheet of these as well, but the spreadsheet is not very descriptive. So I wanted to talk through them first, is to do implementation in year 1 of Discovery from the development fund and then move to operations in fiscal 27. We did have originally earmarked to do 3 years of the Discovery layer from development, but as we're renegotiating the ILS contract, there's going to be some changes to operations anyway. So I think it makes sense to do year 1 where we have this overlap and then move year 2 to operations as we would expect. I am recommending using the Rails support grant to cover the analytics subscription for 3 years, which would involve discontinuing the Rails rebate in fiscal 26. So we'd finish it out this year. And then next year, we would plan to not rebate any Rails funds to our members. And then we would kind of reevaluate that in 28 and determine if we want to move this analytics subscription to the operations budget at that time. Continue with our planned OCLC easement. And then when we approve the budget, based on our new member billing policy, we'll need to recommend a development investment to governing board. And at this time, I'm recommending that it be just a flat $5,000 for incoming libraries in 2026, and then we'd reevaluate that next year. So that would roughly cover year one of analytics, and we could adjust that based on library size if we want, as we get closer to actually approving the budget. Discovery has been earmarked in development for several years and has been earning interest, and not that it's like paid for itself, but we've had that money set aside for a while, whereas the analytics is a new piece, which was my somewhat arbitrary thinking, but keeps with that idea that we're looking forward into what's coming up as opposed to what we've done in the past. So all of this wraps up into potential fees impact for next year in fiscal 26. So at this time, without having a full budget written, I am estimating that we would see an average increase to members of about $1,250. And again, that's average, because we do have a distribution of membership fees. And that would cover largely the additional staff member, as the discovery layer and analytics tool are kind of going to be in development that year. However, preliminary projections indicate that in FY 27 and 28, we would expect to see similar or smaller increases as we move these other services up to development. OCLC fees always increase 4%, and that impact on each individual member varies based on where they fall in the OCLC split. Let me pop up the spreadsheet to maybe clarify some of that. So I didn't send the spreadsheet out because I don't think it makes sense as a standalone document. So here in our current year, I have sort of some like benchmarks of what we have budgeted. And then you can see for the next 3 years, I have our specific projects that we're looking at and what I would expect them to be, either in operations or development. We are, again, with at Vernon will be budgeted into member fees this year for fiscal 26, and Wakanda theoretically would be budgeted into 27. There is some, in addition to the Vernon investment, there's some unbudgeted implementation fees from this year that'll go into development. Again, this is an estimated Wakanda investment. And depending on timeline, there might be a similar amount of unbudgeted bills that end up moving to development. So it's not all laid out on this spreadsheet, but essentially looking at what these potential increases would be, as well as the impact of having Vernon and Wakanda. That's kind of how I came up with potential increases. That's this difference to the previous year. And then I did not do a great job documenting it on this spreadsheet, I think, but this is what we're looking at. Again, the second chunk is development, and we're looking at modest increases over the next 3 years. I would also pull up another massive spreadsheet. You can see this doesn't have all of our libraries in it. It has, which is it has what I'm calling the original 24 libraries, which are not the original members of CCS, but they were the members that were here when I came. So they're original to me. And then because we've been adding members and because we've been, trying to make some smart choices around finances for these 24 members, they've seen significant savings over the past several years. So their member fees on average have dropped 19% since since fiscal 2018. If we had just kept member fees flat from 2018, we'd be looking at $1 million difference. So if we, sorry. Yes, that is, if member fees had been flat since 2018, this is cumulatively what the members would have additionally paid. I also have an amount if our member fees had increased like 2.5%, such as like a regular vendor escalation, and then we're looking at $2.7 million. On a per library basis, you can kind of see here, the green line is the total that the members have paid between fiscal 18 and fiscal 25. And then the yellow and orange indicate what would have been paid. Yellow if member fees had been flat, and orange if member fees had increased. So I bring this up to say, like, we are looking at increases over the next couple of years, but after several years of reducing fees and savings, and this does not include any rebates either. This is just looking at member fees, not at anything we sent back to our members through the Rails rebate or our own development fund rebates. So if we're looking to add services, I think we need to look at that as having an impact to fees. Looking historically, I think we're in a reasonable position to say now's the time. But my goal today is to get some feedback from this group on that. I know there's always hard things in libraries, and I recognize that, there's a lot of funding questions floating around in the world and a lot of general concerns about the challenges libraries may be facing in the next several years. I do think these services add value, and I think that they're addressing questions and needs that our directors have had for several years. But I, want to hear from you all before we move forward and present something to governing board in a few months.
Well, let me just start first by thanking Rebecca for putting together this presentation for us and talking us through all these details. This is incredibly informative and exciting. I think that there's a lot of content in here that reflects what the membership has been talking about, and it's great to see all these plans that are in development. Does anyone have any specific comments or feedback that they want to provide on Rebecca's presentation?
I might as well go. So I would say that I am in support of using an outside vendor rather than doing internal development for a number of reasons. And, I know that there's a fairly large difference, 100 and some odd thousand difference between the two options. But I really think that looking at staffing costs and things of that sort, training and all of that, and maintenance of servers and services and various things, I really do think that it's definitely worth paying to have an outside vendor do this for us. Thank you.
Hey, Becca, this is the first I heard Wakanda is joining, so that's interesting and exciting. So that helps with the potential budgeting as well. I think a $1,200, $1,250, whatever average increase is very reasonable for all these additional services. And I know you put together that spreadsheet of like how much money we've all saved, and that was really useful. It's I don't know where everybody else's board is, but my board won't question a $1,200 increase on something like this, so I'm not concerned about it. But I think adding all these additional services for a very little increase is huge. So you mentioned briefly that you were thinking we would just transfer the LSAP grant into what? Like we won't be getting the rebates then. So explain that again, please.
Yeah, so this year we reduced the rebate to cover the cost of Find More Illinois. So my recommendation is to further offset these new costs that we would use the Rails instead of doing a Rails rebate, we'd just use the funds. CCS would use the funds to pay these additional costs. So like your fees would go up $1,200-ish, and you wouldn't be getting that rebate back. So there is like a double component there, that the total net impact is higher, but your like CCS budget line, you know.
Yeah, for me that's not a concern. I don't feed the LSEP grant back into my CCS budgetary line, so it's not like. But for some people that might, I don't know how everybody else does their QuickBooks, so it might look like a $10,000 or $8,000 difference or $9,000 difference. So I think firming up for everybody the numbers that they will not be receiving if we go this direction. Now I'm fine with that. That makes sense. The only reason for people who haven't, if I'm remembering right, is that we distribute the LSAP grants because we didn't really have a use for it necessarily. And now that we have a use for it, I feel like this is actually a more appropriate use for it.
Exactly. That is my thinking as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. I might have questions later, but I need to see all the spreadsheets and digest a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll be firming up the spreadsheets as well as we get more answers.
This is Ishwar. I just want to say all this sounds very exciting, and it's good value for the increase or lack of grants that we may be getting from the CC from Rails. So I think this will be good investments in our collective futures, and it's a really reasonable price to pay for it. So I'm looking forward to seeing some more detail on the spreadsheets. If you could cost out the total impact that includes the loss of the grant as well, that would help some of us to really absorb what the total impact would be. Thanks.
I would just echo that. I agree. I need more numbers before I can make a decision, because we're looking at that chart. We're the top of the food chain for paying. So I need to make an analysis that I can present to my board to say, hey, this is a good value for us, or maybe is it time for us to pull out and go on our own? To be honest, that's a question that has been coming up here in Evanston a lot lately. We recognize that we get some value, but we also recognize we're paying a big portion of the share. And so, we just want to make sure we're getting the best bang for our buck.
Noted.
Yolanda, quick question for you. Is it the differentiation between the cost, like between you and let's say as the lower cost people that's causing the issue, or is it the amount totally as a sole amount?
It's a question of, could we get a better deal if we broke off on our own, right?
Right. So it's the amount total.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. I was wondering if there was a comparison, because sometimes comparison is, it's the thief of joy. But knowing that, like, Cary or somebody else, one of the smaller libraries are paying 65 or 70,000, you guys are paying like $15,000 more, can make it seem more difficult. But if I'm remembering right, the reason we made that choice, I think it was like 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It was an equity sort of response. So like how do we help the smaller libraries that don't have funding? But again, that puts a burden on some of the bigger libraries, and is it really their taxpayers' job to pay for the smaller libraries? So it's a question we've been all chewing on for 7, 8 years now.
Yes. So I think that's a big piece of it, right? And we recognize the equity piece, right? That's where we're, that's why we participate, right? But we also are getting many more questions. Our levy is much lower than everybody around us. Like we have our city our levy, we can't go up. We're not a Skokie public. We're not getting we don't have higher value residences. And unless Evanston starts building, we don't have a tax base. So at a certain point, our funding is flatlining, right? And so we have to really think about what does that look for us in the sustainable future. And then the second component of that is there is some customization that we cannot get as part of the consortia that we could implement as part of if we break off on our own. And so that is sort of the other question that, can we get some of that, those customization services, the information and data that our community wants, that we can't get now.
Yeah, that's the fundamental thing of the consortium. You nailed it.
Well, Yolande, as you work on your analysis, I'm happy to provide anything I can about CCS and CCS value. So happy to have a call or talk further about this at any time. Other questions, comments?
Yeah, and maybe, in light of that discussion, could we kind of even project what the impact might be if an Evanston pulls out? It sounds like it's something that is being seriously considered. And as we budget for the next 3 or 5 years, I wonder if we can do some kind of an if-then analysis as to what might happen, what would be the impact on the other little guys if 1 or 2 of the big players pulled out. Because
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's the world we live in, so that might be useful.
Agreed.
Sure, that's a good question, but I do think that from just the evidence of the last 4 years, it seems like it's the tide's going the other direction, where more and more are joining us. And like Wakanda, I imagine Cook Memorial will join us in the next 4 or 5 years, and they're very big. And I don't know about anybody else. Rebecca knows more about that as well. But it seems like when Indian Trails, Palatine, Grays Lake, when you look at the original, the savings are significant. And so I think more and more are going to. I imagine more are going to continue to join, even if Evanston or other libraries have talked about leaving in the past. So it's not just picking on Evanston. I was really thinking about it at one point when I was director of Zion Benton. I was like, is this the value that I'm receiving? Could I do like Antioch and just do an open source and save $25,000, $30,000? But then I looked at the staffing, and I wasn't sure about that. But I think that we could potentially calculate a library, let's say a larger partner leaving, but we have to bake in that there's probably going to be maybe 2 to 3 to join, because that's what the trend has been the last 5 years.
Yeah, I can definitely do some projections on that. We unfortunately didn't get to meet earlier this month for governing board, but if you do look in your governing board packet, there is a list of libraries that have expressed interest in joining CCS. I don't have it up in front of me, but we did a non-member survey and we had 11 libraries respond, and 7 indicated pretty significant interest in CCS over the next several years. So those are listed in your document, and that does include Cook Memorial, as well as Barrington, although Barrington's timeline was further out. Yeah, I can do some numbers on that, Ishwar.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yolande, don't leave.
Yeah, don't leave, Yola.
Well, don't worry, we're talking about leaving the city too. So we're exploring everything. So
Leaving everything.
Eli, I got a better idea. Go tell Richard that you will leave unless he joins, and then, maybe he'll join then.
I don't know about that strategy, but our next meeting is scheduled for April 25th. Again, this is a rather unusual budget process just because of the timing of the strategic plan. At this time, we are planning to approve both the budget and the strategic plan at the May governing board meeting. I was just talking to Beth before this meeting that, like, if something wild happens at May governing board and the board's like, all this stuff from the strategic plan, I think we would pause the budget vote and call a special meeting in June to approve a revised budget. But assuming that, what the board is looking for next fiscal aligns with what I've shown you here today, I think we'll be in good shape to present and approve a budget at that meeting. And I think, we should, at April 25th, I will have, a fully drafted budget. I can have some of these other projections. So I don't know that there would be benefit to scheduling a meeting in the interim, but I'm happy to do that if folks want to see something sooner and have a chance to review and react before April 25th.
I'd appreciate I don't know that we need to meet, but sending out documents as early as you feel comfortable sending them out, and then maybe after that we discuss whether we need to meet. I know, like Anthony, Jim, and I have been on this committee forever, it feels like, and I like it. So that's not a complaint, but I know there's a lot of people who might be seeing these things for the first time.
All right, is there any other question, comment? Okay, if nothing else for this group today, our next meeting will be Friday, April 25th at 1:30 via Zoom. And I will declare this meeting adjourned at 11:09. All in
Thanks,
favor?
everyone.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you all for the hard work. Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. I appreciate your
Bye.
feedback.
Everyone, have a great day.